I thought I'd talk today about my new book, The Caretaker. It's a book and it's an audio book, and also it's art. I've got a friend of mine called Sean Disparango, a world-class photographer who's done some photographs for the book. I've always been inspired by The Prophet, and by Jonathan Livingston Seagull, and by The Alchemist, books like that. And I really like the fact that, especially things like the Prophet and Jonathan Livingston Seagull have got nice illustrations. So when I did the book, I felt it could do with some illustrations. So I asked my friend Sean, would he do some pictures? He's done these amazing pictures, which we're selling as well. And we're selling a limited edition of these pictures. They're beautiful. So I thought initially The Caretaker was a prayer that I wrote to myself. I feel as though it was more intuitive than written, kind of come through, because I was going through a very selfish stage in my life where I wasn't showing any gratitude. I wasn't grateful for what I'd got. Whatever I had, it didn't seem like it was enough. You know, it was if I'd published 20 books, it wasn't enough. If I've got 30 books, I hadn't sold enough. If I'd sold 500,000, it wasn't enough books. You know, if I'd done a podcast and, 20,000 people had looked at it, it wasn't as big as somebody else's podcast. I got a beautiful house, but it wasn't as big as somebody else's house. Or I'd written a film and it wasn't coming together quickly enough, or the actor that we wanted, or the production company that we wanted, or the DOP that we wanted. We weren't getting what we wanted quick enough, or it wasn't big enough, or I'd actually just fallen into a very selfish place. And it's quite common in the Bhagavad Gita. This would be classed as falling out of alignment with Logos, falling out of alignment with God, or falling out of alignment with your purpose or with love. And if we fall out of alignment, we fall into mind. When we fall into mind, the egoic shadows take over, and then it doesn't matter what we get. It doesn't matter we've got 500 million. It's not enough. It doesn't matter. I was working with one guy that was who'd fallen into a very dark trade. This was many years ago. And he was a drug dealer, and he was putting £50 million out of the country every 6 months. Even that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. He's got properties, he's got houses, he's got horses. He'd got pretty much everything he wanted, other than the fact that he was a criminal and he'd sold his virtue and he'd lost his soul somewhere. This beautiful man, who was a good friend of mine, still is a good friend of mine. He's currently serving a long time in prison. And despite the fact that he's fallen into crime, I still love him. I still remember him as being a hugely kind man. When I first worked with him, this guy was so kind to me. He did so many things for me. He really looked after me, and he went on this path, and it was sad to see it, because he was a brilliant man. He didn't need to do that. But anyway, it wasn't enough. No matter what he had, it wasn't enough. He said to me once that the guy that come to collect his drug money off him, it was a young kid, would take the money in a head bag, like a sports bag. And he said, I resented him taking that bag because it was a brand new bag. So he was earning millions and millions of pounds, but he still resented letting go of that bag. And his phone kept ringing when I was talking to him. I was interviewing him because I wanted to write a film about the dark nature of drug dealing. And he was talking to me. This was before he went to prison. And his phone kept ringing, and he said to me, you know what? When I get my papers straight, I'm going to get rid of this phone. And then he goes, what am I talking about? He says, my paper's never going to be straight. I can't earn enough money. There's never going to be a time when I've got enough money. My paper's never going to be straight. So there's this sense that I was going through this period of living righteously and living a good life, but the successes weren't coming quick enough, they weren't coming fast enough, they weren't big enough, they weren't grand enough, they weren't recognised enough. Falling into this very small place. And then I remember sitting down one day and looking at my house and looking at my wife, looking at my kids, looking at how free I was. I hadn't worked for 20 years. I've not done a job, like a proper job. My job is writing and teaching now. And I think what happened was I sat in this church in London. If it wasn't this, it was something like this. And I looked across, and it was this big church I go to in London. When I'm mentoring people in London, I go into this church to meditate before I go and mentor people. And along the left line, along the left aisles, was full of down and outs. People, you know, alcoholics, people that were on the street, people with no home. And I remember sitting there, you know, in my posh coat, in my posh life, and looking at these people and thinking, fucking hell, Geoff, what's the matter with you? What's happened to you that you can't see how good you've got it, how good your life is? Your life is so beautiful. And as the priest was coming down, it was early morning, it was empty, the place was empty. And I said to the priest, do these guys sleep here every day? And he said, yeah. And he said, does it bother you? I said, no. And then I got really emotional. I just said, no, I'll look over there, that's my brother. I see my brother over there. I said, my brother died from alcoholism, that's what I see. I said, I think it's great that you let them stay here. I said, that's what the church is all about, that's what it should be about. So I'd fallen into this place of absolute unequivocal selfishness. And I couldn't see how much people had given me, how much people had taught me, how much assistance I was being given, how lucky I was, how rich I was in my life, how blessed I was, how beautiful my life was. I'd lost gratitude, and I'd fallen out of alignment, and had fallen into this place where the mind wants more certificates, more trophies, more money, more of everything. But the same voice that I'd fallen into listening to didn't want to do the work. It didn't want to make the effort. It wanted the ribbon without running the race. It wanted the skills without apprenticeship. It wanted the muscles without the hard work. It wanted the growth without discomfort. And I remember recognising it and saying, what has happened to me? How I've fallen into this place? My life is so blessed. Everything, when I inquired into this negative voice that was rising up, when I inquired into it, I realised that this voice, no matter what I gave it, it wouldn't be enough. It was an egoic projection. No matter what I gave it, it wouldn't be enough. There isn't enough, because it was insecure and it could not be satiated. So I just decided that I was going to stop looking at it. I stopped listening to it. Then I read something in the Kabbalah which said, which talked about the fact that lots of our power is lost in these and gobbled up by these egoic projections. It's swallowed by these sub-personalities or these shadows. And in order to reconnect to our logos, we have to dissolve these shadows. We have to bring them back into alignment again. So I decided to write a prayer to remind myself that that's what I was talking about with the Kabbalah. With the Kabbalah, it said that if we are not vigilant, if we don't bed ourselves in purpose every single day, every moment of every single day, if we don't remind ourselves every day, we fall into the forgetting. They call it the forgetting in inverted commas. We forget very quickly if we don't establish and stabilize this connection with Logos. We fall back into mind. When we fall back into mind, the ego takes over, and then it's a madhouse. So it was saying we fall into the forgetting, and that's our biggest problem, and that can happen within a day or within a couple of days. Very, very easy to be in the middle of luxury and completely forget who we are and what we've got. So I decided to write this prayer that I could read every day to remind myself of what I've got, of how grateful I should be for what I've got, and that even if there's restriction in my life, I can find power within that restriction. So I wrote a prayer, and I started off the prayer by saying, Lord, God Almighty, the universe, a word, if you don't mind, a word about me. Actually, more specifically, a word about me and my specious requests. because I kept asking for more, but I didn't want to do the work. I kept asking to be bigger, but I didn't want to be uncomfortable. I kept asking for the trophies and the accolades, but without wanting to do anything and without having any strong purpose. So I decided to start my prayer and go all the way through it and say, when I ask you for this stuff before I'm ready, just pretend that you haven't heard me. Whoever you are, whatever you are, when I come to you, and I've come to you with my selfish ways and my small thinking and my egoic projections, please bear in mind that I don't know what the fuck I'm saying, because I'm out of alignment. And please bear with me, and please don't give me the things I ask for. I recognise afterwards that if God gave me everything I asked for, I would be in the ninth circle of hell. Things have to come to us little by little, and we have to do the work. We have to be uncomfortable. We have to expand our conscious net. We have to be prepared to we have to prepare to invest in conscious labour and deliberate suffering, which means getting control of the egoic body, getting control of the mind body, which is software, getting control of the physical and sensual body. That's the internal jihad. That's the war. That's getting the ego to become subservient to our authentic self. So I wrote this prayer, and every year I'd put this prayer out at Christmas or New Year. I'll just put it out as one of my newsletters to remind myself, and to also hopefully help to remind other people that gratitude is really important. And I got some really good feedback from it, and a lot of people really liked it. So I just thought this would be a nice parable, because I've always wanted to write something like the prophet, or something like Jonathan Livingston Seagull, something that's not, that's not a massive text, it's not a tome, but something that succinctly kind of says all the things I've learned and all the things I want to remind myself about. So I'm writing to remind myself. So the prayer, each verse of the prayer became the beginning of a chapter of a book about a man like myself that was looking for wealth without work. He was looking for fame and fortune, but he didn't want to do the work, he didn't want to take any risks. So I wanted to write a book about this guy that's searching, and when he doesn't get what he wants, he actually falls into a dark place, and he finds himself on his knees, and he says, please show me things as they are. And when he's walking with nature, he starts to intuit messages from the trees and from nature, and he starts to look at the oak tree and realises that the oak tree is the master of sustainable service. The oak tree is a perfect business model. The oak tree is a divine capitalist. The oak tree knows the secret to perpetual motion. It knows the secret to reciprocity. It knows how to work the world. And he intuits this from the tree and starts to put these lessons into his own life. So the parable is little short of the secret to perpetual motion. It's the secret to abundance. And throughout the book, I've kind of referred implicitly to all of the different Bibles that I've read, from the Quran and the Torah, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and like the Tao Te Ching, the Guru Granth Sahib, all of the Hindu texts that I love, the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata and the Bhagavatam and the Vedas and the Puranas, and this vast wealth of knowledge that's out there. And not just that, obviously, but taking into account my own experiences of being free in the world, successful in the world. Not free all the time, because some days I fall into mind, some days I fall into ego, some days I fall into fear like everybody else, but I'm getting good at bringing myself back to alignment, back to the centre. So the book is something you could probably read or listen to. We had it read by an actor called Craig Conway, and he's done an amazing job of it. It's really beautiful to listen to. It's something that you can put on in the car and listen to every single day, and it will give you these subtle references to some of the greatest theological works ever written. It's give you subtextual nudges towards your greatest potential, towards who you are. So it doesn't want to ignore the fact that we're living in the world. We've got to work with money. We've got to work in relationships. We've got to work with our health. We've got to work in business. We've got to work, with other people. It doesn't ignore the fact that we need to be able to live and eat and survive. In fact, that's what it's all about. I wanted to make this a book that's pragmatic, a bit like if you read Watch My Back. Watch My Back doesn't fuck about. It tells you this is what works in a real situation. This is what works and this is how it works, and the essence is really simple. This is a book that does exactly the same for spirituality, but muscular spirituality. Spirituality that's so muscular that it's frightening. It's so muscular that it's saying that it's frightening, because it's saying the world is a projection from your perception. If you don't like the world, change your perception. That's what it's saying. It's saying you don't like what's out there. You don't like this, these wars and this greed and this corruption and this fundamentalism. You don't like all that stuff. But you're wasting your time if you're going to go out into the world and try and change that before you change yourself. This book is saying change yourself, change your perception. And perception is as difficult to change as it is to break an addiction, to break a habit. It's been with us for a long time. So this is a book that I've written for me. I mean, I love it. It's very beautiful. I feel as though it was a gift to me, and it's illustrated and it's beautifully bound and it's beautifully recorded, but it's a succinct reminder that you can listen to in your car or read before you go to bed. You can read a chapter or a couple of chapters, or you can dip into it like you would into the I Ching and just look at random chapters. That will give you deep insights into living in the world. I'm not interested in theological masturbation. I'm not interested in stuff that sounds good but doesn't fucking work. We've got to have stuff that, please excuse my language, we've got to have stuff that works for us. People have needs. Those needs need to be met. It's one of the things that Gandhi talks about. People need to eat, people need to drink, people need to be able to live in the world. And this, if you read something like the Mahabharata, which is about that big, it's a huge tome. It's from the Hindu text. It's kind of the fruits of the Vedas, and it's really good because it talks about sex, it talks about war, it talks about religion, it talks about business, it talks about money, it talks about service, it talks about relationships, it talks about the whole book really is about the battle between good and evil, between negative and positive, and how we can, if we are aware and if we've got a consciousness, that we can temper ourselves by not falling into the negative, by not succumbing to. We can temper ourselves and grow our consciousness by not falling into vice. It's a proper book that scares the shit out of you, because when you read it you think, they're the questions I want to ask. How do I deal with money? How do I deal with relationships? How do I deal with sex? How do I deal with business? How do I deal with the fact that there are corrupt people out there? How do I deal with the fact that there are greedy people out there, that there are violent people out there? I'm interested in that. When I was doing the martial arts, I was interested in how am I going to make this martial art work for me outside a chip shop on a Friday night when it's greasy and slippy and the guy I'm stood in front of doesn't care that I'm a 5th Dan or a 6th Dan, or that he doesn't care if I'm desperate Dan. I want to know what's going to work. And when I was working in that world, people weren't telling me what would work because they didn't know. They weren't telling me the truth because they hadn't inquired into it themselves. Because people were busy selling system and ostentation, and they'd lost sight of essence. And the essence is really simple. The essence of street combat is really simple. It's so simple, it's insulting. Well, that's the same with muscular religion. And again, I know I've said this a lot, but for me, religion is not dogma. Don't get the two mixed up. Religion is about realigning. It means religare or religio. It means to realign to our purpose with a capital P, to our logos with a capital L, to realign to God, whatever your perception of God is. So this is a book that I wanted to write that said all of those rich things, and said we can try all these different routes, we can go along all these different routes to try and find ways of making money fast, the get rich quick schemes, how to get a physique fast, how to get, the secret to a great diet and all the rest of it. All of this stuff we see all the time, that system, ostentation. Let's just come straight back to the center. This is a book that says this is how you can live in the world and sustain it. It's not about what you do, it's about who you are. When you find out who your authentic self is, and you align that authentic self to your purpose, to your natural bias, the world will be just perfect. So we all really hope that you love The Caretaker. We all really hope that it says something to you. I've already seen some great responses from people who have listened to it and read it. It's not a big book, but it's a big book. I hope you enjoy it.